You're in the driver's seat.
Thank you, Ed. Very happy that we're having this conversation. I feel really grateful for it. Actually, very excited about it because I'm looking forward to our continuation of the relationship and dialogue that we've had for so many years now, and the obvious depth of connection and understanding relative to our relationship to the divine process, and especially in relationship to Adi Da. And as I expressed to you, it's very useful for me to get to know you better and to listen very carefully to your expression and your communication and sharing with us what has transpired in your life, and all of the different connections and conjunctions and interventions and experience and your own sense of self or not self. um, so yes, thank you very much for that. And I also, just to begin with, wanted to ask you if there's anything that you felt after our beginning dialogue of my interviewing you, or and then if there's anything you took away from it that you'd like to express.
Well, what I took away was the value that I have with you and the depth of our conversation and what is available for us to really dive into. And
Mm.
because of who you are and what you've been through and experienced in your life and your time with Adida, most importantly, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to speak with you because of who you are. And basically, I'm very happy to have this opportunity to speak with you.
Yes, thank you, thank you. I feel likewise, like the who you are is is the crux of the consideration, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yes, very much so. Um, Both of us have had unique experiences, different and unique, but the sameness or the depth at which we connect is what is interesting, most interesting. And this is the dialogue that I want to continue to explore with you, and yet not to negate the history or the story of your life and how you became aware and awakened into and matured and took responsibility for what was moving you. And if I understand correctly, our initial dialogue, it was very broad sweeping. And also, I felt like we got to a certain point when you began to speak about more from what occurred in the 80s. You mentioned ayahuasca, years of that, and then and then a little bit about looking at it from the perspective now of your present um, age and time and place, and what you do with Beezone. So that we did a really broad sweep. But I'd like to hear a little bit more about what occurred after that significant period of time, from the 70s through into the 80s, when it seemed like there were a lot of things that became concretized or incarnated in your own human life, and going beyond the limits of what you had to work with in your personality as a young man, as a child, as a young man, as a man, and then the awakenings that occurred as a result of your connections with many aspects of what we could describe as the great tradition of mankind, humanly, religiously, spiritually, intellectually, experientially. I'm just really impressed with the vastness of all the different influences that you came in contact with. And yet I felt what you were describing was that you began to become aware of a more sense of yourself in relationship to the heart, and then also a continued learning and awakening and discovery and inquiry relative to more profoundly, who am I? And And then in that process, you have spontaneously felt moved to communicate and to serve others through what you've done in your work in the world with people. And then also that came into being through your manifesting the Beezone. So that's kind of what I've taken from it. And when you started to speak about, obviously you had contact with the teacher that is the use of psychedelic substances, a revelation that occurs in the context of that. And then you also had influences through your study, but then also direct experience with Chogyam Trungpa and the meditations that occurred. Just your passionate heart impulse to serve humanity becomes a teacher in and of itself. You grow through that process. And then obviously Adida and your coming into his sphere of blessing and teaching and transmission and your response to that. So I noted that you said that when you actually came into Adida's physical company, what you had already begun to feel through having read and contacted with him through the method of the siddhas and the knee of listening. And then you also expressed that you were not one because of your Buddhist experience and the manner of enquiry that you had been engaging in, and your fervor then to grow in your understanding, even intellectually, because of a possible presumed limit relative to your capabilities. You actually engaged it very fiercely to go beyond limits. You were always going beyond limits. You were moved to go beyond limits because it felt that the heart impulse, even though you couldn't identify it as that in your earlier years, but when you became aware that you weren't living from the navel, that you were the place from which you were moved was the heart, and that everything was happening in that. And I remember you expressing also that you became aware that you couldn't really identify this me separate from the whole, and that the ability to be able to express your whatever it was that you were experiencing in relationship to the divine, that actually those two had a very strong connection.
Very close.
And yeah, so that's what I'd like to explore with you now is like maybe you could begin with speaking about your first sitting in darshan with Adida, and then how that began to unfold.
Well, thank you. I mean, you really covered a lot there, and probably would be a good place to start is the time in 1983. I came to the community in, I think, March or April of 1983, and it was a kind of unplanned event, and it just happened to be able to see him. I will back it up a little bit. Before I saw him. I was in New Orleans, about to go into Manhattan and move to Manhattan and get into acting in New York City. And my sister worked for Pan American Airways. And I used to fly standby when you could fly standby easily. So I said, you know, give me a ticket to New York. And she said, fine. And she just happened to say, listen, I have another slot on the ticket. Where would you like to go? And I thought for a moment. I said, well, put down San Francisco because I would like to check out the community and see what that was about. Because this is 1983. This is like 10 or 12 years since I've been investing in his literature and his magazines and his Dharma and you know, through the literature, he was just extraordinary, but not enough to draw me to him. And so I flew out to San Francisco, and I just got on a bus out of and went to the bookstore on C Street. And it was a Friday night, and I didn't know what to expect or what to do. And I just walked into the bookstore, and I was walking around, and it was a nice thing. And okay, that was nice. And they happened to have a movie that evening on Gertrude Stein. So I stayed for the movie
Mm.
and it was nice. And I walked out. And, I was just about to leave. I got a sense of what the bookstore was and the people there, and it was nice. And Rendell Bauer, who was the devotee at the time, was behind the counter.
Mm.
And he said, hi, how are you? And I said who I was. And it was casual. And as I was leaving, he says, oh, by the way, we're having a no remedy seminar tomorrow morning. If you'd like to join that, you're welcome to. No, I had no plans or anything like that. And I said, sure, okay. So I got a hotel room and I stayed that night. I walked into the bookstore in the morning and people were gathering around at 8:30. The event was supposed to start at 9 o'clock. So I'm walking around the bookstore and I'm looking at all the books and we were nicely laid out. And I didn't realize what kind of schemata he had there, but it was a 7-stage layout. So I was going over to my kind of study, which was Buddhism. So I walked
Sure.
over to, this has got a little humor to it to me anyway. So I walk over to the Tibetan section and
Mm.
I'm looking at a Tibetan Buddhist book and I'm looking at it and things are happening around me. And all of a sudden, I think I just dropped 250 micrograms of LSD. I am now
Oh.
fully tripping. I'm not just having a minor flashback. I have energy running out of my hands, out the top of my head, down. The heart is open, and I'm just saying, oh my goodness. I have no idea what's going on, but I don't know how I'm going to walk up to that counter and pay $6 I just could. It was like one of those moments, like I can't even
Mm.
know if I can walk. I'm really feeling like I had just dropped LSD. So somehow I managed to get my stuff together and walk to that. And it was a hard walk to do. I walked to the counter and somehow figured out what $6 was and laid it down. And I walked into the back of the meditation room, which
Mm.
was at the bookstore. And Eileen and Jim Steinberg were holding this event. And I just got a seat and I was very comfortable, but I was still having a very difficult time. Um, first, does anybody else feel this? I mean, what is going on here? So I'm having trouble sitting in the seat. Because,
Mm.
I'm used to conducting energy. So I'm driving my left foot into the floor to stay on what I felt the ground. I had to just dig my foot
Mm.
into the ground to ground my body into the
Mm.
floor, onto the floor. And
Mm.
it's out the top of my head. And I'm now having to hide my mudra. And I'm sitting there politely and just really saying, whoa, this is going to be an interesting morning. And James Steinberg introduced himself. He turned around. He was going to do an invocation, a puja, a little
Mm.
invocation.
Mm.
So he turns to the murti and he lights the incense and he starts waving the incense. And as
Mm.
soon as he starts to wave the incense, a wave of just bliss filled my
Mm.
being. And I was thinking it filled the room. And
Mm.
and I peek around and people are looking like they're just ho hum, everything's fine. And I'm going like, whoa. But as
Mm.
soon as he waved the incense, there was just this song of bliss and
Mm.
feeling of just love, just
Mm.
being circulating in the
Mm.
room. And that settled me down to some degree.
Mm.
Well, so I was totally focused. One thing about having that feeling is that you are riveted in your attention. Whatever you put your attention on, it just locks in.
Mm. Mm.
So from about 9 to 12 that day, I was just
Mm.
locked into what James was saying. I don't know if I could really be interested in what he said because I was really just working with the energy, conducting the energy, and
Mm.
it was only thing I remember was something like an LSD trip. And then we had to go to lunch at uh, Dennis Malone and Brian Malone had a restaurant
Mm.
down the street, Millie's. So we walked down there, and then the rest of the day was a little mild, but it was still quite strong. And after the seminar, I really didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do, and I began to walk out, and somebody came up to me, and Marcia Hughes, I think Paul Hughes' wife at the time,
Mm.
introduced herself to me, and she was the only person who really spoke to me that whole day,
Mm.
and just said, "Who are you, or where are you going, or what you're doing?" And I said, I'm just going to get on a bus and go back to San Francisco. And she says, well, why don't you stay with one of our family homes? So I said, fine. So I wound
Mm.
up staying the night with a family with children, and it was in Novato, and it was a very pleasant evening, and they were very nice people.
Mm.
And and I left the next morning and flew back to New Orleans and then New York.
Okay.
And but I said to myself, there is something there that I need to
Mm.
go back to. Now, I did not
Mm.
associate this feeling with Arida. I didn't put two and two together. I didn't have any sense that
Mm.
he, his influence was that. So that was my first time there. So I actually went, I did 180 degrees. I was heading for New York, and now all of a sudden I'm going to go to San Francisco, and everybody's looking at me like, wow, what are you doing? Anyway, so I get into uh,
Mm.
my Volkswagen Bug and I drive across the country and get to San Francisco, and I move into a household with a bunch of
Mm.
people. And, next thing, I'm a teacher. So I figured I'm going to try to get a job in the community as a teacher, but nobody knows me. And I talked to Dennis Duffy was the principal at the time, and said, well, nothing's coming up yet, but, stay in touch. And, oh, by the way, Rick Flick Rocky is not going to be teaching and doing the cooking in the school program. So would you like to cook? Because I was a cook at one point in time in New Orleans. So I said, sure. So all of a sudden I became the person to provide the meals for the school. So that was my first introduction to the community. And then slowly, I got involved with the community. Now, Arida is living in Fiji at the time. And all of
Yeah.
a sudden, people are what somebody referred to was popcorn. People were entering the seventh stage of life. And
Mm.
there was this, I think it was probably by this time, June of 83. It was just
Mhm.
everybody was so excited that finally somebody broke through, if you will,
Mm.
and
Mm.
got it. And so the
Mm.
community was a buzz with okay, it's happening. And
Mm.
other people started to make some kind of gesture on the island that they were in seventh stage, and now everybody's talking about, it's happening. It's going to,
So this is,
transform everything.
yes, yes. This is at Charlie's place that this is
Right.
happening, which is before we got to the island. Yes.
Right.
Mm.
Little did I don't know. And so
Sure.
I'm not familiar with any of this stuff.
Sure.
And I'm kind of
Mm.
trying to figure out my place in this community. And other people on the mainland here, on the United States, North America, were also, kind of saying something about what they're feeling, and then it started a whole consideration with people and things like that. So that was my
Mm.
initial first couple of months there. And then I
Okay.
finally got a job teaching in the school. And and then lo and behold, Arida announced that he was coming to America for what turned out to be the Love of the God-Man celebration. And so I don't know if it was at this time, but there was a time when he said that he was going to come to America. And about the same time he landed, there was a blackout, an electric grid shutdown of Northern California. And I thought it was kind of humorous and a little bit auspicious that you could probably read a lot of things that the circuits were overblown when he arrived. But anyway, so we had the Love of the God-Man celebration, and I was invited. So I finally got to sit and be in his company. And so there are 900 people in this tent by the tennis courts, where it used to be the tennis courts. Yes. This huge tent, and 900 or 1,000 people. There was a lot of people there. And there was singing and chanting, and we're all in the room when he enters into the room. And and the first feeling I got, it was his pervasiveness, his whole energy field was permeating the whole tent. And I could feel that associated with that permutation, that permeating energy, there was an intelligence to that energy. Okay. And it wasn't like it was generating, he wasn't generating, it was just his presence was total intelligence. It had an awakening quality. And everybody was feeling it, but it wasn't coming from one place. It was just a field of awakened energy. Yeah. And it was purpose to wake. It was just self-evident what it was. And I was close enough to him to look and see in his eyes. And I saw immediately that nobody was there. That there was an absence of a quote unquote person. And immediately I saw that he had already died. That's what came to my mind. Okay. And I got a sense of, oh, and the first sentence of the prologue to the knee of listening just started to arise. Death is utterly acceptable to consciousness and life. I said, yeah. And then he morphed into, and I don't want to get mystical about this or anything, but it was a profound moment because I saw that what was happening here, and I felt it. And he turned into Ramana Maharshi in that kind of death absence, but radiant absence. And that's a paradox to even say. Yes, yes. So, and then I was looking around to seeing how people were feeling and whatever. And so that was my first experience with his, in his physical company. And also I realized that it did not necessarily, and I mean this in a physical way and also a psychic way, that his radiance is all pervading, not only in that room, but the light is always on. Right? And so this is where I start to connect it to other things and other outside of his personal company. Yeah. Ah. Ooh. Yeah. Ah. Well, thank you for that. Right in the brightness domain, right in the room of divine light. And that obviously then must have awakened you to
go beyond even what was clear in the context of your awakening in relationship to Buddhism.
Well, no, because simultaneously he came out with Nirvana Sara.
Well, I was gonna say, Advaitayana Buddhist, eh? You're an Advaitayana Buddhist.
I said,
But yeah,
yes,
yes,
because I'm a full student of the Lankavatara Sutra. I have
yeah,
spent years with the
yeah,
Lankavatara Sutra, and
right.
I'm reading it as if it's in plain English. And I'm
Yes,
very steeped in D.T. Suzuki's studies. I'm very steeped
right.
in the sutras itself.
Mm,
And I
mm,
know, I mean, I got books and books and notes on the
right.
Lankavatara Sutra, and now I'm reading it in
Yeah,
plain English. And I
yeah.
go, wow.
Mm,
So
mm,
I
mm.
did. I said, thank God, as he said, thank God I'm not a Buddhist.
Well, yes, and that's what I was alluding to or acknowledging was exactly the as what he has described. There is a premonitory or a continuum in relationship to the divine revelation throughout seeming time and space in relationship to the divine process, and his manifestation was to bridge all of that and bring it into the divine transcendental domain that is not that is coincident with life itself, with light itself, with manifestation itself, with the permeation that you're describing. It's not the Atman or the sunya, the place in which you are removed. And there is that, and it's one of the first questions I asked Adida, which William Tychonis found incredibly amusing because he was the one giving the presentation. But the first question I asked was, can you tell me the difference between Bhava Samadhi and Sahaja Samadhi? And it's the either are you in the bliss and no thing, no one, no arising, no one, there is no ending, there is no beginning, there is only the the eternal, and yet and that's the transcendental domain, which we were speaking about the last time when we ended our conversation, and there is then the what Adida brings is the recognition of non-difference in coincident with light itself, the nature and condition. So this is extraordinary what you're describing, and here you are then also having said previously that God man, how does this connecting with Adida as a human incarnation, all of what I'm feeling and the extraordinary experience that you describe in the bookstore. And
Yeah.
look at what gets all of what was teaching you or drawing you or what you were learning came to a point of what feels to me a culmination in a radical understanding of using Adida's language.
Well, I took it as a true initiation
Yes, yes.
into an understanding.
Mm. Mm.
It kind of confirmed or put together, if you will, not in
Yes.
a mental. It did have
No.
mental
Mm.
permeations, but pretty much
Mm.
it really brought into the a confirmation of the
Mm.
transcendental. Now, remember, as you pointing to, I'm a very practical and phenomenologically oriented, incarnate person. So it really then brought in the fact that, oh, it's here. He's here. It's all has to do with incarnating or being here. Because I really didn't I didn't want to, I mean, I can be in these high states and they're fine. But life is different than just getting up and out. But that's my orientation. So I really am
Mm.
I'm looking around. So I
Mm.
have this understanding now that I'm just developed. But now I have a community to look around. Well, what do
Mm.
you see? What is your
Mm.
understanding? Do I
Mm.
see these kinds of things with the people who I am now associated with in this new
Mm.
community?
Mm.
And so honestly, for the next 3 years, my focus was on the community.
Mm.
How much of what I believe to be or understand to be the case, so to speak, for me, how much is that true of other people? Can I feel that with other people? Are they
Mm.
in any
Mm.
way connected to that? Can I feel that in them? Can I feel that
Mm.
in their lives? And so my next couple of years was really kind of feeling out the community. How the
Mm.
community, did they have any sense of things that was it kind of connected to what I was feeling?
Okay. Right.
Um, so so that was, for the next couple of years, I was really, I mean, I got to be a teacher in the school, and I was connected to the community and the parents and the people, and I got married to a lovely lady,
Mm.
but it was more of a dharma uh, marriage,
Mm.
because you had to be in relationship with
Mm.
somebody to have that kind of
Mm.
emotional part of your life uh,
Yes. Yes.
worked with. So,
So, wow. I love hearing this.
mm.
So you were in New York when you began to do school teaching, or you became a school teacher in California again? Because I
Oh
do
no,
remember that you were a school teacher also in New York at some point too with his children when the Garden of Lions was established back
no,
east.
but I wasn't with the Garden of Lions. So before I came into the community, I was a
Okay.
teacher. I worked
Yes.
in state mental institutions and residential treatment centers and public
Mm.
schools. So I was a kind of a seasoned special education teacher, but when I went to the community, I just got into the big wisdom school. I didn't go to
Okay.
what was
Yes.
the Garden of Lions.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay. Just getting
yeah.
my trying to get my timeline straight. Oh, I'm feeling all of what you are describing because you could say that even though my story or an apparent other story may have been completely different, what you are describing is so familiar, but I'm not talking about familiar from an ordinary perspective. I'm talking about being established in this satsang, in the domain of the bright and the radical understanding that is synchronous with that. And because you already had quite a significant um, preparatory process, you could call it, in terms of your own life growth and being moved from the heart, your availability and psychophysically even in terms of uh, the conductivity and your passion about it, and then the immediate understanding that, well, this isn't exactly about me and mine and independent. Your immediate awareness is then with the whole. I'm hearing you say that, like your interest in what are others feeling, what are they experiencing, how does this manifesting.
I think honestly, for me, it really was a grounding, which is really kind of funny, a grounding to reality that I was not connected to. It was kind of, yes, I am, but there's no uh, focus
Mm.
to the ground. And so that at periods of time before Adidas community, because of various states of consciousness that spontaneously arose for me in many different circumstances, and sometimes in very public circumstances, where
Mm.
people would come up to me, and I was very shy about, you know, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't, people would pick up on certain kind of thing, and they would come to me with different kinds of things. And I would not want to put myself up in any kind of teaching a role. But I could also delude myself and feel, because of various experiences and states that I was experiencing, that I could see how one could feel that they were somehow enlightened enough to
Mm,
be a teacher. And
mm,
to me, that was like, whoa, dude, don't even
mm,
get to that place, because now
mm,
you're not. You may have had experiences,
mm,
but to start to claim anything out of that would
mm,
be seriously psychotic in my
mm.
book. At least I'm
Right,
using traditional mental health terms,
right.
and very delusional. But
Mm,
yet I could see how states of consciousness that spontaneously arose for people could be a sign, a stamp of somehow, oh, now I'm awake. I can be a
mm,
teacher. I could
mm,
sit in a lotus position for 2 hours and not
mm.
move. The third eye opened up and all this
Okay.
stuff happening.
Mm, mm.
No, I
So, right.
stayed away from that. That's
So
because I
did
saw.
that,
Go ahead.
yeah. So did that observation and insight and then choice to not respond and be in a relationship to others as a teacher or even be considered as somebody who could transmit something, or if others became aware of something that was occurring that was a bit different than just their ordinary sense, experientially, you've made the choice to not engage in that way and were aware that, whoa, that's not what I'm here to do. Did that have anything to do also with either your relationship with Chogyam Trungpa, your relationship of the different traditions, what you experienced in the different realms through going into the realities that exist simultaneous with this grosser body-mind mechanism here? And then lastly, did it have anything to do with you finally connecting that the process of Siddha yoga that you became aware of or would have become aware of in your relationship to Adi Da, because that's the lineage or the process that he is combined with, that he is a Siddha from the Siddha realm, from Siddha yoga, reality, and that is grounded here once the Siddha incarnates and lands for this purpose. That's his function, is to do that, what you're describing. And of course, there are many that do that transmit what they have realized. And so Adida's realization is what you were beginning to feel in him as the Siddha master. Did you regard him were you a devotee then at that point that was different than what a Buddhist would describe themselves as?
Um, I'm awfully careful to when I was in the Buddhist community and I asked to take the Bodhisattva vow. I didn't take it.
Mm,
I didn't take it because I knew I couldn't hold or live to be. I, I, I knew it wouldn't be true to take those words seriously and wholeheartedly and for lifetime upon lifetime upon lifetime to hold to that. I had this feeling that I could not do that. It wouldn't be true of me,
okay, that's interesting.
right?
Why do you think that was? I mean, you just described that you didn't feel it would be true of you, but do you maybe attribute that to the movement that was always at the point when you became aware that the heart was what was moving you? That was where life was being lived in the domain of the heart.
I'll tell you the honest truth, because one of the things about the realizations or the understanding that I got. Okay, so after that time in meeting Arida in California when I went to visit the community. And I had this feeling, and I was associating it with Arida, kind of. I flew back to New Orleans. Now, this isn't just, that wasn't like the first awakening or the feeling of energy and stuff like that. I mean, I could tell you back in Mr.
Sure.
Savarise's fifth grade class when the nectar was dripping down the back of my throat. No, I've always had these kinds of experiences. But I also saw that there was no difference. I could be in the most sublime places, and I could go back to Gibson Street on Covington Avenue in Covington, Louisiana, sit down and have a beer in a bar,
Mm.
and it wouldn't make any difference to my state of mind or my feeling or my awareness or the environment would be very different,
Mm.
but I was not feeling any difference with that sublimity, that awakeness, that feeling. It maybe didn't have the energy associated with it. So it didn't matter to me where I went. I could go
Right.
left, I could go right, I could go in, I could go out, I could go up and go down. It was always here. I didn't have to go anywhere.
Mm.
Now
Mm.
that was the deeper part. I mean, it was like, oh hell, I'll just walk down the street and see what happens. I'll just
Mm.
get my car and drive and see what happens.
Mm.
And I lived a little bit like that for a number of years, but it didn't always turn out to be, you know, things that I wanted to keep on experiencing.
Mm.
So
Mm.
so I guess I really felt that I was not um I don't know, trustworthy. I couldn't trust myself. I don't know. It was no difference. Everything was just the same. There was no difference. So it didn't
Okay.
matter whether I was there or here or there or what. It didn't make any difference.
So during this period of time that you're describing, did you regard yourself as a devotee of Adida? Did you feel that? I mean, because you've already experienced something significant and connected it with his presence or the permeation, or were you still focused more on the experiential aspects of it, and you were already had experienced part of the community? Um,
Well, see, I was never, no, yeah, I mean, on a social level, I could say I was a devotee. I wrote my mother and I said, I'm going to become a devotee of Arida. And I wrote my family and I told them what I was going to do. And for me, that was kind of whatever the social aspects of this thing were. Um, Now remember, I'm checking things out, and I'm not very impressed with what I'm seeing around me.
when you're in
Okay,
California with the community at this
with the
point.
community, I am not seeing what I think should be alive in people's lives. I just don't see it.
Okay, but did you feel it like when you would sit in meditation with people? Like, did you speak to people in terms of what their own expressions of their experience of satsang or anything like that?
Let me say about that, because I am a meditator. Now, I'm not in a qualified level of student that allows me to meditate. I'm what would be called at that time an LMI1 student or LMI2 student. I'm not
Okay.
FCC1.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
because I wanted to go into the communion hall on C Street, because every afternoon all the FCC students would do a puja in the afternoon. And I was looking for always opportunities to go into these kinds of environments, but I was not qualified to do that.
Sure.
So I used to sneak in.
You cheeky bugger.
I
Yeah.
used to sneak into the FCC2 pujas in the 4 o'clock or 4:30 in the afternoon and sit in this puja and meditate until I was found out.
Ah,
And
ah.
they told me I could not go into that room and I could not go into the puja because I wasn't qualified to do that.
So what did
So
you know when you were in the room when you were unqualified to do so?
I felt his blessing. I felt the siddhi. I felt the energy. I
Mm,
felt him,
mm,
you know. And I'm not really an outwardly devotional person because I guess I'm really more of a kind of meditator. So I'd rather just sit, and my voice is really not really much of a singer anyway, and I would ruin the whole tone of the room if I sang. Um, so I was really just wanting to be in the room and be in that environment with his energy, his feeling, his and recognizing that there was a submission that was happening to invoke his blessing. But I was not allowed to be in there. So all of these things, it was comical
mm.
in a way, you know.
Sure,
It's comical.
sure. Well, I'm glad that you had at the time. Did you have humor about it? Was there? Did you understand why that was being indicated in terms of your study and what was being communicated? Did you
Yeah,
understand why maybe that was?
yeah.
Yeah.
Now, believe me, I have been through so many situations. I do not buy the social deal. I do not buy it. I don't
Hmm.
get into it. I don't see, oh, I'm offended and you're telling me this and you're telling me that. I don't give a who, what about. I don't care. Can I come in? Yes. I can't come in. Okay, I will come in. I'm not this. So I'm
Okay.
always I'm reading, you know, I'm reading the situation. I don't give a shit. I mean, I want to. I'll do
Yeah.
what I have to do. But
Right.
if you're not going to let me in your room or your house and your place, I mean, okay, I don't think that's why I say that's not a, it's not, yes, there's more intensity in that location, but really, that's in a way, that's like just wanting to get high in a lot of ways. So, I mean, it's a blissful.
Okay. So I wonder if maybe the fact that that occurred for you also had something to do with what you experienced when you went back to New Orleans during the period of time that you were describing, where there was no difference then.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You- Um, so that in and of itself is, well, again, relating to Adida and your understanding of him and his teaching and his transmission. What was your relationship to his radical argument then and the activity of the ego in relationship to what you were experiencing as this extraordinary transmission and revelation of the divine light and being and the blissfulness and the non-difference, non-differentiation? What became active in you? What was activated in relationship to the understanding of the ego act itself?
Well, the biggest thing is the contraction that I felt in the navel, and also I felt in my mind, and what everything what the mechanism that was still of obviously needed to be purified. I mean, I wasn't like an enlightened person, so these tendencies and everything were always arising and coming in place, and always kind of wanting to 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 lock it into some
Mm,
locality. Um, so, as I said earlier, I mean, I was always suspect of my own um, sense of self or lack of sense of self. I always knew that the mechanism was always a reflective mechanism, and that I could buy it, I could identify with it, and so a lot of it was just kind of in a Buddhist way, just allowing it to kind of wash over me. It wasn't like
mm,
trying to
mm,
grab onto
mm,
anything, but
mm.
always focusing in the heart sense of feeling intuition of him, and not in the formal, um, um, focusing on his merchi, so to speak.
Mm. Mm.
Um,
But did you receive transmission through the visual sighting? When that did occur, like through your study, you would see images of him, or what occurred when he walked into the room in that tent in the first encounter in the physical form, bringing it down into the body. Did that pervade your process in terms of making that connection? You're saying it might not have through the murti, but the murti is a secondary means. It's a doorway. It's a threshold, just as his physical body is. So the who that you are receiving as divine spirit and being, that did correspond with your recognition of Adida as the Siddha Guru. Mm-hmm.
yes, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, I had been in many, after that period of time, I was going up to the Mountain of Attention Sanctuary, and I would see him in different darshans, or see him walking across the grounds, seeing him, bless the trees and do yajnas in the sanctuary. And you could feel it as soon as he rose, as soon as he walked up over the knoll, the field of blessing energy just went out,
Mm-hmm.
200 yards, you could feel
Yeah.
this blast of energy. And in that, it would be awakening parts of the yogic aspects of, let's say, for my own self, my own energy system. So I could
Mm-hmm.
feel this opening. And you'd immediately want to do this. You'd immediately want to hold your hands up.
Mm-hmm.
And you
Mm-hmm.
really wanted to bow. And you really wanted to give the recognition that he is who he said he is. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the asana that you would naturally want to be. And that's a natural response, an
Mm-hmm.
open response.
Right. Yeah. And so that tied in then with the understanding of the mechanism not doing this in relationship to what was being seen, what was being. So you're involved very much in real listening, as he uses that word,
Right.
listening and understanding. Um, and then of course there's the developmental process of growth, wherein what you're describing occurs. The mechanism is more available, or free energy and attention to be able to receive what's being given without it just being a social, an I other kind of an association with a murti form or those objective forms. It's an actual real process that's occurring spiritually. Mm.
Yes.
And,
And I was always,
spiritually and transcendentally in terms of a greater, I mean, because I didn't come to Adida with the level of understanding and experience that you had relative to the great tradition. This is why, in part, why it's interesting to me. I too similarly had many different kinds of phenomenal experiences of up and out, and awareness of being expanded beyond just the physical body. I had no clue, and even a reference traditionally at all, apart from what I said I experienced with Jesus and the spirit. But even then, I was not an avid studier at that
right.
point in time. Very much more. I mean, you mentioned Carlos Castaneda, and yeah, okay, and some sort of more, what was the fad, during that period of time, during the 60s and 70s and that kind of thing. Well, obviously those influences, but so I'm aware of some of those influences, but you were much more serious in terms of your investigation and your freedom to be able to go with it, which is characteristic of many devotees in the so-called earlier years with Adida. There seemed to be much more liberality, even for myself. Like I dropped what I was doing. Many people have that story where obviously there was a movement, that we were being moved, even as Adida describes himself, that the bright always moved his incarnation. So he could not do what he was doing because there was a movement always beyond, and there, until the heart recognized its true satisfaction through the self-authentication that occurs in satsang with the Siddha, who is the transmitter of that. Mm.
Right.
Mm. And yet how unique it has occurred for each individual. Now, the process can appear to be different, but the process itself is not different because it is precise. So the story, and this is where you can go into making what Adida would describe as fourth to fifth stage errors. And you're alluding to it when you say, I don't want to make this into a mysticism. It's not about the phenomena. It's something beyond that, while still allowing the experiences to occur. And yet you can make the error of attributing truth to the experiences and to the differences in the stories as if that is all divine. The stories themselves, in and of themselves, are not the divine. It's the divine that is moving and revealing itself. Right. And the laws inherent in the actual real yoga of any true tradition, in the real yoga, there are very significant specifics relative to the mechanisms that you are relating to.
So for me, part of the next phase, if you will, of working within the community was integrating or getting a sense of what the community, how the community was in response to what I was feeling. Not, I wasn't just playing off myself. I was saying, do other people feel, and how do they express that devotion, or how they express that understanding? And really, I'm always looking for how it shows itself in life, how it shows itself in relationship, how it shows itself in connection. And honestly, I was really disappointed. And I don't mean to make any kind of judgments, but
well, were you just because of the liability of what you described as a youth, and I'm asking about self-understanding, because the whole process of radical self-understanding also involves not only the primary sense of being able to identify this as the occurring not only in different parts of the body, but that the whole sense of self-identity is this, And so to actually know the truth of anyone or anything, and even to be able to exercise the intelligence that you were becoming sensitive to, the real discrimination requires going beyond this in relationship to anyone. So to be able to know for real what anyone is experiencing, there is a listening, just as though there is a listening with Adida, the real listening, like I describe how much I'm valuing actually listening to the divine process that is being communicated through anyone's apparent story, which is all based on memory. And as Adida points out, then it's actual myth. All history is myth. It doesn't make it unreal in the sense that it's not actually occurring. But this is where we get into the splitting of the atoms, so to speak, the paradox of it.
Right.
But go ahead. I was just going to ask the more succinct question, is that were you sitting back and observing, or did you actually connect with people? Was there anyone that you connected with that corroborated, or that you felt there was a synchronicity in terms of the recognition response?
Well, yeah, I mean, there were so many people who were devotional and relationship, and they devoted their lives to this, and I did make very, very good friends, and even to this day, I have very, very, very close friends who were formed back in those days. And I guess some of what I wound up getting involved with, and I'm not going to mention names, but people who were with Adida in 1973 and 1974, when he was Bubba, and there was a lot of play, and there was a lot of, first name basis kind of relationship with him. And of course, in 1977 is when things started to become, quote unquote, religious, in the sense that the formal religious devotional exercises, the way of Divine Communion was in 1975. The letter he wrote to the community. It was all changing, and was becoming, more devotional and more, I guess you could say, religious, more formal, more sanctified.
Mm, mm. As
So,
consideration, that's a
well,
point to
right. It
emphasize.
didn't just get,
Mm,
do the
mm,
three Hail Marys. It was like, okay, what does it feel like to sit in front of a communion hall, and how do you come up with with
mm,
a devotional mantra, or a prayer, or
mm,
how does this develop in our way, and through your understanding,
mm,
and
mm.
so, yeah, no, it was a full samyama. Not that I was involved with it, but these are the
Mm,
priests who were
mm.
involved with this, creating a devotional community.
Yes, because I was there at that time and I remember what you're speaking about. Because even
Right.
though I didn't come to Adi Da until 1970s, I didn't come into his physical company until 1976. His influence or intervention, as we've spoken about, was obvious to me earlier on because of my being moved by the divine itself. Um, as always already the case, not cognizing anything about it, and all beings in relationship to not just Adi Da, but genuine realizers will describe these kinds of coincidences,
Right.
and spontaneities, synchronicities, oh my gosh, this is amazing, and this was perfect, and attributing all of this with the spiritual process in different ways. And so at that time, I do remember that shift that you're speaking about. And it also had to do with Adi Da's movement from what was happening early, where he was just widely available in the earliest days, anybody off the street. And, and as he was himself realizing a lot of people are responding, it was a big movement. There was a big response to him and what he was doing in that early time. And then he also expressed that, well, for him to be able to function most effectively, he needed to work with a group of individuals, and he couldn't just be freely available as Bubba, and that when you study his own story, his own, what we describe as a Leela, because it's a divine process, as what we are discussing and locating. We're locating that thread, the divine thread, and what is anchored in reality in our process of consideration. That is constantly. And there's the radical understanding, and then there is the reception, the freeing of energy and attention for the recognition and the reception of the truth of it, truth itself, as Adi Da communicates it and transmits it. And it does then, as you saw in the morphing, and many devotees have described that morphing of the visual, like, this being that seems to sit before me is not Franklin Jones.
Right.
That's a fictional character, just as the gross persona comes and goes, and the history is what exactly? So you saw Ramana Maharshi, that, and many people will describe, depending upon their own vasanas, or the deeper personality and the aspects of the patterning that coincides with our incarnation as a physical, psychophysical entity that is real. It's not the
Yeah.
non-dual sense that, like, everything is an illusion and we don't exist, and therefore you can do anything you want and it doesn't really matter and everything is divine. Would not be the confession of one who understands this, and one who
Right.
recognizes the coincident recognition of non-differentiation of divine light and divine manifestation. I'm ecstatic to be able to consider this with you, and because I think the differences in any seeming dialogue about this in relationship to the process itself, if it is useful and if it is about recognition and it is of service, it will guide us to always focus in the heart itself, in truth itself. And we will then be able to discriminate and transcend the errors, to be able to be at peace and at rest in the self position, which is self-sufficient. as it was self-authenticating. This is how he describes it would be. And that actually, then the fullest realization of that, in which there actually is the dissolution of the difference, any sense of separate self, that full dissolution, then that's when the seventh stage process of transfiguration, transformation, indifference, and that shining, those signs begin to manifest. But for us, we're still in that process of developmental growth, listening, hearing, seeing, perfect practice, all of that being made, the consideration coming alive in terms of being able to actually fully take responsibility for those gifts. Yeah. So I'd like to continue to have this dialogue with you. And because again, we I think brought it more forward in terms of your so-called your story or script or however pattern or however you want to describe it, and the uniqueness of how it had moved you and what was awakened in you and how you responded and participated, and then we can continue with that.
Well, I would love to, and I appreciate once again having the time to speak with you and talk about him.
Thank you so much, Ed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.